Okay, so I decided for this video that I would show you my process for quick sketching. And this is kind of how I go about drawing faces and characters, just purely from imagination, just using my own knowledge of planes, basically, planes of the face, and some of those anatomical forms. But quick sketching is kind of tricky to teach people. In my drawing courses, I take pride in going into the nitty-gritty details and, teaching people the different planes of the face and, some of the anatomy that's actually relevant to know. But quick sketching, that's the one part that I struggle to teach my students because I don't really think it's a thing that can be taught. When you sketch quickly, you have to sort of get a feel for the drawing, and I think the only way to get good at it is to just do it. That's how I got good at it, Nobody really taught me how to simplify and sketch quickly. It was just something that I did through trial and error. But, my aim for this video is to sort of show you in real time how I go about doing it, and maybe that will give you a bit of a glimpse into some of the design decisions that I make, and some of the processes that I use to sketch portraits successfully. So here I am. I've started with very big, bold shapes. I'm not using the Loomis method. To be honest with you, I don't like it. I think it's good for beginners. I think it's it's a valid enough way to draw, but the Loomis method is I don't know. Every time I use it, I always end up with the same character. Like, it just looks like the same person. I don't know. I prefer to keep my sketches a bit freer than that. So, I use the classical proportions, but I still keep it loose enough that I can get different characters out of it. So I basically sketch the position of the head, and then I draw the underside of the jaw where it inserts into the neck. And then you will have seen that I have drawn the cylinder of the neck where that inserts into the shoulders. And then from the chin, there's two diagonal lines that travel upwards towards the top of the head. And you can see how those diagonal lines cut through the face. And basically, I use those lines to separate the front of the face from the side of the face. It's a very basic geometric construction, but I find it works really, really well because you kind of get the position of, the width of the cheekbones and the width of the eye sockets as well. It's just an awesome proportional trick to get those proportions in quickly. And, already I've pretty much got a face right here. I've sketched in some of the hair. Nothing's sketched in detail. I'm really trying to resist going into detail. There I am, just placing in the eye line right there. I'm struggling to narrate this because I'm drawing faster than I can really explain the process. But hey, that's quick sketching, right? So I've drawn two more diagonal lines from the inside of the eye sockets, and they travel towards the outer edges of the jaw, and that basically defines that cheekbone structure. Now, I don't always use that. This character I'm drawing, I'm just drawing like a young man, basically. So I'm not going too overboard in the anatomical details. I'm just drawing the main planes of the face. So when you're drawing young people, like young adults, basically they have more fat around their faces, which kind of smooths the appearance of the face. It's when you draw older characters, that's when the anatomy becomes more prominent. You start realizing some of that sort of cheekbone structure and, some of the sagging skin, that, the jowls and all of that stuff. So that's where it gets a bit trickier. But for younger characters, you can keep the planes fairly basic. You don't have to go overboard. Less is more, I find. And you'll also notice that I'm using a lot of broken lines. in every single video that I made, and especially in the portrait course, I always tell my students, you know, use broken lines. Don't use full lines that just kind of block everything off. You want to keep them open and you want to keep it broken, because using broken lines will help you to make any necessary changes a little bit easier. So keep it broken. Don't complete the line work, if that makes sense. And you can already see I've pretty much got a face on the page, even this early in the stage. I think it's been 5 minutes into the drawing, so it's not a super fast sketch. I can sketch faster, but I wanted this face to look pretty good, and I wanted to sort of just take a bit more time to think about some of those plane changes. And I'm thinking in terms of shadow shapes, right? So in this example, the light source is coming from above. So I'm drawing the shadow shapes around the bits of the brow that are facing downwards. And it's very tricky to draw like this. And I think this is another reason why quick sketching is very hard, is because you need to have a very solid grasp of those anatomical planes. Because if you don't know the planes of the face, it's very hard to predict what those shadows are going to look like. So you can see I'm drawing in with broken lines the shadows of the jawline, because the jaw is facing away from the light source, so that's just going to be in shadow completely. So, you know, the intention of this video is to not give you a full tutorial, because that would just take a long time. And the course that I've made actually covers in great detail the constructions and proportions of the face. But this video is for those of you guys who are trying to get into quick sketching, and you're trying to figure out, okay, you know, how do you do it, and what's the best method? And this is just how I go about doing it. I use a lot of broken lines, and I'm actually focusing on shadow shapes. And I try to make those shadow shapes very interesting to look at. I think drawing boring shadow shapes, I think that's a sin. You know, I think that's, you have to make them look interesting. Like the shadow of the ear that I'm drawing in here, that's probably not correct. I'm pretty sure that's wrong, right? Like I've just skipped over a whole bunch of anatomy in the ear, and the anatomy of the ear is quite difficult for me to remember. I've not quite mastered that one. So I would probably need a reference to draw that properly. But I just go ahead and just put in a bit of a zigzag and call it a day. And that's the really cool thing about sketching like this, is that you can get away with some of those abstract shapes so long as you're thinking of the overall anatomy. So, and I think it's sketching loosely and abstractly is how you get very interesting results. Because yeah, when I was using the Loomis method years ago, I was good at it, but I didn't like it. All of my characters looked exactly the same. I found it to be very limiting. I think it's good to learn the basic planes of the head shape. But me personally, I think there's better ways to learn. And the way I learned was studying from classical sculptures. So, you know, looking at busts of Caesar or Marcus Aurelius, or any of the Greek statues by Polycletus. And, you know, I think classical sculpture really is the best source to study from. Because you can see how varied those sculptures are. They do follow a certain set of proportions, but they're all very unique in their appearance. And, you know, they've got different hairstyles and beard styles, facial hair, and even head shapes, you know. And so that's why I moved away from the Loomis method and started learning from the classical sculptures. And then after learning some of the basic planes, I then studied a bit more of the anatomy of the face, mainly the bone structure. That's the main part to know. I can't remember every single muscle of the face, to tell you the truth. In fact, when I render the shadows, when I describe the shadow shapes in my drawings, I'm actually focusing on the fat pads of the face, because it's actually the fat on the surface of the face that really gives it that character. So, and there's YouTube videos on that topic. You know, I think, I can't remember the YouTuber, unfortunately, but, you know, if you go onto YouTube and you search, you know, fat pads of the face, you'll get some good results from that. And it's actually the fat pads and, you know, all the fat on the face that actually influences the appearance. It's not really the muscles. There's a little bit of that, but if you open an anatomy textbook, and you look at the muscles on the face, there's a bit of a disconnection between what you're seeing there and what you're seeing on a real person. And that was the trouble for me. I just didn't like studying anatomy from the traditional sense for that reason, you know, because I was learning about all these muscles, and you know, it's important. It's important to know how they move, and how they influence the expressions of the face and all the rest of it. But all those small anatomical details, you know, those tiny shadows that I'm drawing in here, it's actually influenced by the fat on the face. So, yeah, if you study all of the locations of the fat and how it is shaped on the face, I think you'll get much better results in your characters. So definitely research that one. So this is basically the finished result. We're about 10 or 11 minutes. Actually, probably took me about 12 minutes to do this one, but that's not bad. You know, 12 minutes for a sketch like this. This is a very good foundation for me to do a much more realistic drawing. And you know, the best part is I didn't need a reference for it. I just kind of just went for it based on the knowledge that I knew. And another tip that I can give you is you want to be very selective about the anatomy that you're drawing. Don't try to draw everything. Consider the light source and try to predict, you know, which parts would be in shadow based on the light source, and then go from there. Don't try to draw all of the anatomy, and only try to draw the anatomy that's relevant, right? So, you know, like the dimples in the corner of the mouth, and, you know, like some of the folds around the nostrils, you know, like I sketched those in because those are some pretty prominent shadow shapes. But if you have a look at the character I just drew, the shapes in the light are actually left relatively clean, and it still gives the illusion of a face. It's a very abstract way of thinking, because you're just kind of thinking in terms of planes, but you're not really drawing the planes. You're actually just drawing the planes that are in shadow, and you're using a very different part of your brain. So in this example, I'm actually going to draw the same character, but I'm going to draw him as an old man. So I'm going to put a few more wrinkles in there, and I'm going to try and show you guys how the appearance of anatomy changes depending on the age of the person. So in the first example, that's like a middle-aged man. He's probably, you could say he's like in his 30s maybe. Somewhere about there. But in this example, I'm going to put a few more shadow shapes in there to sort of give the illusion of an older male. And this is why it's important to really study the anatomy of the face to be able to do things like this. So I'm trying to keep the same proportions, you know. I'm giving him a very squarish head shape. He's got a bit of a square jawline, right? So I'm keeping that. I'm placing in the main landmarks, like the brow line, the bottom of the lip, and the base of the nose. And I am keeping the classical proportions in mind, but I'm not doing it perfectly. I'm sort of breaking the rules a little bit. I'm just kind of throwing them in there and see what happens. So I'm not being too strict about it. So from the corner of those diagonal lines that cut across the face, that's where the brow changes shape. Sketching a little bit of the hair there. And there's those other diagonal lines from the inside of the brow line, and then they travel towards the edge of the jawline. And I like to use those lines as a guideline to draw the anatomy of the cheeks and, yeah, some of that bone structure, basically. Now, I'm sketching this with a pen, and I'm getting these really scratchy lines. And the way I'm doing that is I'm holding my pen at the very end of it, and I'm kind of flattening the angle. Because if the pen was more upright, I would get these very thick, heavy lines, which are not that appealing to look at, especially when you're just in the first stages of a drawing and you're sketching the proportions. I'm holding it a little bit flatter so that I get those really scratchy, broken lines. And that takes a little bit of practice. You might want to play around with that, but that's a good little tip that I've got for you. And another reason I love sketching with ink is because I tend to draw a bit more quickly. I mean, my drawing speed is probably slowed down a bit because once the ink is on there, it's on, right? Like it's done. So I have to think about my marks a little bit more. But I think overall I tend to draw faster because with a pencil, it's very tempting to erase the last mark that you made, right? I know we've all fallen into that trap where we bust out the eraser and, we draw a line, we get rid of it, we draw it, get rid of it. And as a result of that, the drawing just takes forever. Using ink actually forces you to plan ahead a little bit. And it also forces you to work through your mistakes. So once the mark is on there, that's it. It's done. Game over. There's no erasing it. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing for your art practice because it's going to force you to plan ahead for your next marks. And it forces you to work through your mistakes. And I think that's a good thing because not all mistakes are terrible. In fact, I would say most of the time I get these really interesting shadow shapes is because some of them were placed by mistake. Some of them were a bit... I drew some lines that I probably didn't quite anticipate. So as a result of that, I need to sort of find a way to work around that and try to make it work. And as a result, I get some really interesting shapes in there, which in turn creates very interesting portraits. So that's why I think ink is such a nice medium to work with. It's very unforgiving. Again, you might want to practice learning the planes of the head with a pencil before you grab the pen. But once you're comfortable with it and you're ready to give it a shot, give it a go. When I first learned how to sketch quickly with ink, my first sketches were terrible. They really were. But I had fun, I had a lot of fun with it. And that's another thing that I really want to encourage is, don't be a perfectionist about your artwork. Just play around, have fun, see what happens, and just try to appreciate the fact that you've found the time to draw, because God knows that we're all very busy in today's world. Everybody's working longer and longer hours and money is harder to come by. So, the fact that you have found some spare time to draw really is a reward in itself. So just try to appreciate that, I think, and just have fun with the process. Don't worry about perfectionism. And again, the more you do this, the better you're going to get. You're going to get a real feeling. You're going to develop a feel for holding the pen correctly. And it's just one of those things that in order to get good at, you just have to do it. I just had to do it. Nobody taught me. I'm mostly self-taught when it comes to art, to tell you the truth. I've read a lot of books, and I've done a couple of online courses here and there, but most of what you're seeing here is just my own technique, and I just had to develop it through trial and error. That's just the way it goes, unfortunately. There's no secret to drawing. There's no hack. It's just discipline and consistency. That's what gets you results. So you can see here, like, I'm placing in some of those shapes on the cheekbone there, using those diagonal lines as a very rough guide. And you can see how it's a similar appearing character, but he's just aged by like 30 or so years, like we're drawing a very old man here. But he looks pretty much the same as the last guy because the head shape is basically the same shape, right? Like they've both got square heads. And so it's the big shapes that really unifies them, I find. So, and of course the hairstyle. I'm making the hair appear a little bit more as if it's receded a little bit more in this example. And this one took me a lot longer to sketch because, when you're drawing older people, there's a hell of a lot of anatomy to account for. So you've got to just take your time to think about your next move. But yeah, try drawing like this. Try drawing, by keeping the shadow shapes in mind. If you're unfamiliar with the planes of the head, there's a lot of resources that you can learn from. There's plenty of books on the topic. There's plenty of videos as well. You can just watch it on YouTube. And of course, I've got my own drawing course on Gumroad, if you care to check that out. I go into a great detail in that course when it comes to the proportions and structure of the head shape. And I try to teach it in a way where you can remember the planes of the head and actually be able to do it from imagination like I'm doing in here. And I know these ink sketches are pretty basic, but that's kind of the point, with this exercise. You want to keep it basic. Because what I can do later is I can take these shapes and, using a pencil, I can draw it again, but actually draw it in much greater detail. So, I can get all of those halftones and highlights in there. I'll actually show you a quick example of what I'm talking about. So this was a character that I sketched up a couple of months ago. It's for a much bigger project that I'm working on. I'm trying to do like a large figurative painting of Roman soldiers, and this was one of the character designs for it. And this character I just drew from my head. I certainly needed to research Roman armor and weaponry and things like that in order to, make him look like a Roman soldier. But even then, like, while I was working on this drawing, everything was just done from imagination, and I was quite happy with how it turned out. But, everything from like the hands to the anatomy on the forearms to, his face design and his face shape, everything was just drawn from my head. And, it took a while to refine some of those forms and get all of that anatomical detail, but I wasn't in a rush, This was a drawing that I really wanted to take my time on and do correctly. But yeah, I absolutely love how this guy turned out. And that's my favorite part about drawing characters from imagination, is that I can create any kind of character that I want, really. So, I wanted this guy to have like a couple of scars across his face. You know, you can see that they're cutting through across his lips, and I just wanted to create this real mean motherfucker. You know, that was my design brief. Just create this tough son of a bitch. Just this guy that's been in a lot of fights, you know. And you know, there was no model that I could think of to draw from. Sure, I probably could have just Googled one, but I didn't want to do that. I really wanted this guy to just be my own character, so that's what I did. But I remember somebody asked me quite a while ago, you know, he said, you know, Tom, why do you feel the need to draw everything from your head? Like, what's wrong with using reference? Why do you place such importance on drawing from imagination? And he said, you know, is it just for bragging rights? And, you know, I thought about it, and, you know, I thought to myself, well, man, what a stupid question. Because, you know, okay, you know, maybe some of it's bragging rights, you know, I'm just like, yes, look at this, I drew this from my head. But in reality, it's not even that. It's, to me, the ability to draw from imagination, it represents complete freedom, okay? There was a time, years ago, where I couldn't draw from imagination no matter how hard I tried. I could only draw from reference. I was pretty good at portraits. I used to do portrait commissions quite a while ago. I don't do them anymore because I don't enjoy them. But that's a story for another time, I suppose. But you know, I used to do commissions and work from photographs, and you know, I also worked from live models and stuff like that. Drawing from reference really wasn't an issue for me. It was something I was kind of good at. But drawing from imagination, man, that was hard. And when I tried doing it a few years ago, I just couldn't. There was just a lot of gaps in information. I needed to level up my perspective skills. I needed to level up my knowledge of anatomy. I needed to level up my ability to quick sketch and draw constructively. There was a hell of a lot to learn, and it was like a whole world of just missing information that I didn't have when I was drawing from references. But as I said earlier, to me, it's complete freedom, because if you can draw from your head, like you can just draw anything. Like I'm talking, you know, Kim Jong-gi type levels of drawing, then sky's the limit, you know? You can do whatever you want. And that's why, for me, it's a really important skill to have. And I think it's very important for every artist to learn. And if you want to draw large figurative scenes, you know, multiple figures in a perspective drawing or whatever it may be, you're going to have to learn how to draw from the mind, because you're going to quickly realize that references just aren't going to cut it. You can probably get away with it here and there, but the drawing is going to be much more cohesive as a whole if you're in complete control of the entire thing from start to finish. So that's why I place great importance on being able to draw from imagination. And that's not to say you don't use references at all. Like I said, you know, to draw this guy, I had to kind of look at, you know, what a Roman helmet looked like, and, you know, what kind of equipment that they carried onto the battlefield, things like that. But once I've done that research, and it doesn't really take me that long, I do a few quick sketches of the equipment, just getting the general proportions in. And then once I've got that, boom, that's it. Then I can just draw it from imagination, from any perspective. That's what constructive drawing does for you. And that's why I sketch portraits like this, because I end up with very interesting, believable characters. And, you know, quick sketching like this really helps me to figure out what those shadow shapes are doing, and what that character might be, how old he might be, or how young he may be, or so on and so forth. So that's why I am very strict when it comes to perspective drawing and learning the planes of anatomy and things like that, because it really does free you up to draw the things that you actually want to draw.